With creativity being poorly valued, then someone is like, why don't I just get a poster made by a machine? Why do I need a creative for that? Now, when you understand the amounts of value that creatives add, even to a city, we've seen with Margate, we've seen with East London, they literally change a place and make it a better place at a place-making level, at a connection level. Having them integrated in the place that we live in is incredibly valuable. So once we start understanding this, then I think it makes sense to then make sure that we retain creatives within societies that we live in. Those are not good societies to live in, the ones where you don't have creatives in.
Marine, welcome to the Oxford Talks podcast. How are you doing today?
Pleasure. Look how comfy this is. I love it.
We got them specifically for the guests because, they're going to be here for a while.
So comfy.
Marine, for the people who don't know what you do, what do you do?
So I run the first talent agency in the art world, which was now set up 10 years ago. Been working in the art world for the past 17 years. So I had identified that there was a gap in the market for how you represent talents and how do you diversify their revenue streams and how do you diversify and widen the audiences of the sector. I'm now a published author with Penguin, and I talk a lot about the importance of arts within our visual environment, visual literacy. I also publish academically. I have an up-and-coming paper with UCL on new policies for the visual environment, but I published in the past with Warwick University as well on the value of public art. I'm expecting my third kid, as you can see. And otherwise, love reading. I dance ballet daily, love traveling. I just returned actually from the Atlas Mountains last week, which was so beautiful. So delighted to be here.
Amazing. Tell me about your time management skills. That is what, because I think when we were speaking before,
yes,
managing all of that, writing books and all of that, what is your go-to sort of strategy that you always sort of deploy that my day needs to look like this? Of course, 2 days are never the same, but what is your kind of default way?
I think you kind of got a glimpse of it as I sat down, is that everything I can get out of the way and dispatch or respond, especially as a CEO, I do it straight away. I don't procrastinate. I'm never someone that's going to doom scroll or do something that is not generally task driven. So I can then switch off from my work quite easily. So any small task or any fast decisions I can make, and because I respond to my emails very fast, is sent out. Then this is how I divide task in my head, is the ones I need to think about and the ones I can just already act upon. And of course, having run the company for the past 10 years, it's easier to now know the ones I can act upon really fast. But that gets divided. Anything that needs a bit of time to think or is writing then gets allocated a slot where I'm only doing that. And it has to be finished within that time slot. There's no option. There's no maybe tomorrow it will work out, because time is just the essence, I think what all of that does, and in fact, that's also the reason I love dancing ballet, is you're super present and you're super focused. But it also means that you're actually enjoying the present moment outside of work too. You just keep switching from different types of present moments, whether it's a full focus into strategic thinking for your company, or even your projection of financials, or even a full academic paper, or very quick decisions, or whether it's being with your friends and family where you've switched off from work or you switched on for the right and you're fully present. So it's practicing being present, because that's all you have, and not wasting any time in between. So, I don't watch anything, or I don't even if I listen to a podcast, that's usually when I stretch or when I serve breakfast to the kids, but I wouldn't be someone therefore that will procrastinate.
Speaking of strategic decisions, one of the biggest one is to onboard a new talent. And I think I was watching your work, and you make a sort of quite a deal that when you onboard a new talent, you really make sure that the world knows that someone has just joined you.
Yeah.
Now that's a decision that you can't take on a whim. Can you walk me through that process a little bit? That what clicks with you? What is the? I'm assuming there's a lot of sort of paperwork involved. How does that process looks like when someone wants to join?
Yeah, and in fact, you could talk about onboarding a talent both in terms of artists, but also in terms of people in your team. I think that kind of qualifies in the same way. For the artists, we have a selection committee, so we get 200 applications a month. At this stage, we're very much like the agency, the go-to that people want to apply and join. So we will review like the technique of the artists, the strengths of their concept, the the potential that we think they have and we can add value to, and with our support network as well. So that's the first part, is like the review. And I think it's the same when you hire for your team. The first part is to make sure that you review as many people as possible. And then you really have an understanding of, for that medium, who are the best artists. Or in the case of a job role, for that job role, who are the top candidates. So I think the next step on both sides, whether you hire for a team member or whether you onboard a talent, it's about then thinking, who is the human being behind that? And that's not about, this is not personal, but they are now, like when it comes to talents, we are looking for that specific drive, resilience, ability to be flexible, ability to project themselves onto projects or ideas that they've never realized before. Like if I look at some of my most successful ones, like a Raven de Clark, for instance, she had never touched a bronze sculpture before she launched like 5 of them in the US for a very large commission. So she was able to trust herself and work with our team to make something happen that she'd never done before. So there's certain types of qualities that you now see that you need to have, I think, to kind of be successful as a talent. And as a team member, I think, especially as the company is also now a bit older, again, what's right for you, what's right as a company culture, what will be probably more of a friction to the existing team. And there's different stages. I think who I hired in the first part of the business and the mid part to now is also quite different. So you also learn to kind of adapt to the phase of the business and the phase that you're in terms of the type of team that you want to build. I actually found all of this very interesting. I think the reason I brought the team forward is because I just finished hiring for a few new roles, but I actually really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the process. I enjoy getting to meet those people. I enjoyed really thinking deeply about who would be right for the roles, and who do I want again to kind of take part in that next phase of the team.
Amazing. Can you? I'll come to one question in a second, but let's say so you receive 200 applications a month.
Yeah.
What does happen afterwards? Like how long it takes, and what's the sort of step-by-step process? What one can expect?
Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to respond to every single one that would not be ultimately chosen. But I think the next step is the ones that make the cut gets an interview.
Okay, and that's with you.
That will not be with me. That will be with team members, and then I will come at the end. The reason I do that is because I don't want it to be personal, and I don't want it to be. I want it to be something that my team is incredibly excited about, and then I come in and be extra supportive too as well. It's more of a collective decision.
Amazing. And so, how many members are in that sort of selection team, and what kind of qualities that you have sort of selected that I want this to be there, this to be there before it reaches,
Yeah, so you're looking for a selection committee as 16 people. And I think it's more, again, we have 100 talents on our books. We manage about 40 of them too. So there's 2 separate groups. The ones that are on the books where we just generate opportunities, but we're not directly managing them. And then the one that we manage. And in fact, there's even a last category of the ones we work with, but not as tied. So I think a total, you're probably looking at 200 plus talents that we ultimately interact with on a regular basis. And I think that is the aim for us, is to build a portfolio of people who are all different to each other, who are all have, whether this is a medium that they bring forward or whether this is the idea that they bring forward, this is unique to them. And I think back to the clients I work with, whether they're cities or governments or large corporations to activate their spaces or do large projects, I want to be the place where any random brief or any random idea that you want to artistically realize, we have the artist for you. And we know that the artist is the very best at that. So this is why it's less about taste. It's more about building a portfolio of people who actually excel within a specific medium, a specific technique, a specific idea and concept. Because then I'm building ultimately that portfolio of people that can answer to all types of projects and all types of needs of our clients.
Maureen, how does it look like? For example, I come from a very sort of tech heavy sort of world, and in hiring, even for those processes, it looks like you have a set brief, and things are very kind of binary, can be at times. and someone has to do a very specific job, and you hire for them, and that's it. But I think in the art world, I mean, as the popular saying goes, art, beauty is in the eye of beholder. It comes across that a lot of this world is subjective to the people who are working, people who are managing them. How do you sort of take the challenge of sort of running a company for almost a decade now, staying objective to the goals and making sure that the subjectivity doesn't take you too far away from to day-to-day running and kind of that strategic vision you have for a long term?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't think of it as subjectivity. I think of it as it's like if I was in the B2C space and I'm ultimately trying to have people who represent the topics or the ideas of the conversation that audiences actually want to hear about. So I am responding to needs on the ground of people saying, I want to hear more about that topic, or I really warm to that medium. And then there's another thing being a B Corp, there's also topics that I feel need to be seen. So I think that's more, this is why it's less around subjectivity or around taste. It's more a market analysis of what people actually, conversation wise, wants to emulate and support. And then, like I mentioned, we were behind the first sculpture park dedicated to slavery. That's the commission of Raven D. Clark. That's where I step in as a founder and running a B Corp, where I feel I want that reality to be seen visually. I want that to stay historically, and I want those works to be on the streets for everyone to access, because that topic is not enough integrated. So that comes out of more intellectual values and academic side of mine. The other side is more genuine B2C, where you just make sure that you have a portfolio of artists who are of the times and respond ultimately towards what people want to see.
Amazing. And how does the commercialness and the art gets better? Because I'm asking this, it feels like the world is running through algorithms these days. And artists, as historically, they are the reflection of our society. But the algorithms are deciding that if you do a certain thing, maybe we're not going to entertain that. You have to do what the algorithm kind of rewards. So how do you sort of take this opportunity and sort of a challenge that guide them through as well, that yes, this is what the algorithms are suggesting you should be doing, the commercials of it, but this is the artistic part of you that wants to do it?
I think having set up the company again on quite clear value system, this is where I think, and you've seen that over the years, my skill set is to derive heavy marketing and communications around topics that actually might not be the most marketing or communication driven. Um, and that's because, again, it goes back to my gut feeling that I want this artist to see the light of the day. I want this project to see the light of the day. And it's almost existential. I believe this is the right thing for those projects to exist, because it will mean that our visual environment will become more inclusive through that, and more diverse, and more we will get exposed to visually. So I think that's a skill set that I learned through my previous company in LA, where I was exposed in LA of, the kings and queens of communication and marketing. And I've implemented, ironically, those skill sets to a lot of my artists who are deeply academic, who normally don't have that skill set, and to topic that I feel, again, should be within the mainstream conversation and should be within at large what we see daily. And I think it's the same with the book, where initially I was approached by a lot of art world publishers, and I didn't want an art world publisher. I wanted a mainstream publisher, because I believe that whether it's visual literacy, which we'll go on to explain what that is, or whether this is the visual environment we inhabit and the importance of it, that's not a silo niche art world conversation. It's a mainstream conversation. So I feel confidently that after 10 years, one of my skill sets is to shift something that is seem niche and make it mainstream. And that goes also with the passion of democratizing the art world, the passion to make sure that actually all of that content is not accessible to just people in my field, but actually outside of it. So I think that's the reason we've been able to not counter the algorithm, because they're substantially more wealthy than all those tech companies, and they can do a lot of harm, as we know still, but still build successes that I think would not have been expected, I think, within our sector or within the trends of the algorithm.
That's amazing. And if I were to come to you as like a kind of, let's say, let me put my journalistic hat on you and come to you, and if I were to ask you to give me a kind of a trend report of what's going on these days,
Yeah.
and where do you see the future of those kind of trends unfolding, technology wise, AI is here and all of this.
Yeah.
What report would you give me?
I mean, there's plenty to say right now. It's like 2025 is definitely a year where you are not short of things to say, I think is the answer. So technologically, I think obviously AI has disrupted the sector. We work with a lot of AI artists. In fact, we had the very first AI artist 5 years ago who sold their work for Christie's.
I ask you, just to explain, what would AI artist mean? What does that mean?
So it's basically artists who, instead of using paint as a medium, use AI as a medium. But that's the AI here, whether this is using OpenAI or Midjourney or others, becomes a medium. In the same way that if you're a digital artist using a screen and kind of playing up in the past with Photoshop, that will be your medium. Now AI has become one of your mediums.
So I can be an AI artist as well if I just have.
You
I'm great
can.
at prompt engineering.
Well, as you know, like I think there is a lot of creativity and artistic input in creating the prompt. There's also, for a lot of those AI artists, they're building their own models. So they're not just using what's being ultimately trained by the data, but they're like pretty innovative. So I understand that one can just think it's easy, but from knowing the technical capacities of mine, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I don't think it's that straightforward. But you can absolutely from today on try this and pursue this. So I think that's really interesting because we sit in the middle of that where I've seen amazing examples of AI artists and I've seen an amazing example of experimentations. And we were one of the first to represent AI artists, I think the first, in fact, 5 years ago with that sale at Christie's for £500,000 for that first AI work. For obvious. So we've built a pretty strong digital division in the business since. And there's a lot of experimentation. And I think it's interesting to see how they experiment technically, but also how they're able to incorporate storytelling that actually, even in the mainstream, is not yet there. And the dialogue between the two. There's also, as we know, ethically, a lot of controversy around AI and the artists. Ultimately, we've seen some advertising companies already using AI imagery more than commissioning creatives. There's a whole financial shortfall that's going to come from that. There's the ethics that I touched upon earlier on, again, how is its data trained, and are those images actually compensating who made them, and what are the ethics of those platforms? We also know already that, and we've seen that with the NFT world, where an OpenSea has cancelled and removed some of the artworks made in Cuba. So it's always look democratized, it always look non-centralized, but actually when you really look at it, most of those firms are in the US and they have a specific political agenda and a specific economical agenda. So there's definitely challenges that go through this, I think. And we've seen that again with the last wave of NFTs too, not just AI. There's also biases being amplified, as we know. You talked about the algorithm earlier. I mean, the dream of technology would always be that it enrich our environments, but in reality, as you know, it makes us think the same way, and that's always something that we have to fight. Yes, it's that bell curve, right? You're hopeful that you'll be using all those tools so that you get exposed to things or images that you've never seen before, but as we know, like bottom line, we end up thinking more and more the same way, which we have to counter. And then there's loads of really interesting companies like Latimo.ai, which is thinking around how do you make AI more inclusive? How do you work with artists and intellectuals to do that? And so it's really, for me, as you can see, I'm finding all of it really interesting. So I think I would definitely put that in the trend reports on like the different challenges of the ethics, but also the different types of experimentations that artists can derive from it. Geopolitically, I think you have to address it. Ultimately, I'm a B Corp. Most of my friends in DI got fired over the last few months. Some of them also got told that they shouldn't be posting about International Women's Month. The last few months has been really intense in terms of, I think, values that we thought were progressing forward, that we suddenly have seen being fully removed from the agenda. More than that, and having just published a book on visual critical thinking, it's a war on critical thinking. You see that out of the US, where everything that's being attacked upon the universities is, and I think that is a lot of your work, which I think also on the journalistic side is really controversial, the fact that you are fighting critical thinking, which is one of the things that I think is most essential in life, is critical thinking. So there's, and obviously artists are inherent with critical thinking, that a lot of what art stands for is to make you question and challenge how you see the world. So you can imagine that there's quite a lot of friction with all things that are, with all times like this where there are frictions. I'm actually hopeful that there's going to be incredible works that comes out of it. We're in a position where we can continue and strive and ultimately maintain those value systems, and hope that in a few years' time they will come back and be better integrated again. I know that progress is not linear, and that's just the way it works. But I think geopolitically, it's a really interesting time in terms of a comeback to very conservative values, an aggression towards anything that's critically thinking led and anything that's artistically led. Because as you know, in the US, the attacks were not just university, but also museums and art collections. So it's everything that is culturally and critically thinking led, which is really interesting.
It's such a sad thing, to be honest.
It's sad. I think it's, I don't know if I actually would put the word sad. It's obviously sad. I think it's worrying. I think it's probably also the first time for my generation where I grew up in progress. Like, I'm born in '89. That was the year of the Berlin Wall falling apart, and also the UNESCO Declaration for Children's Rights. And then it keeps going, where there's more rights coming up, and naively you think, well, that's good. That just keeps improving. So I think it's probably a good waking up call for my generation that this is not linear in that sense. And although we have experienced different economical crises, I hadn't experienced that level of pushback on social rights. I am very much born in a time where the UN has an importance, diplomacy has an importance. Like, all of this has been taken for granted, and we realize that actually is not meant to be taken for granted. So I think hopefully that's a wake up call. I think art has plenty to say, and public art same, because it really is about shaping those conversations in the mainstreams, and hopefully being able to include people from all walks of life, including people who disagree, into that main conversation. So intellectually, really interesting.
Rain, for the next question, consider me as a lost student, and I want to
Yes.
put your academic hat on it. I want to go back to the AI question.
Yeah.
So we said a few months ago, I had a conversation with one of the partners of Pentagram, the design agency, Harry Pierce, and he said to me that the AI is not going to be a force where it takes jobs away. And for a very long time, we thought, okay, art and artists are going to be the last one kind of be affected by AI.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be completely the other way around. They were the first one to be disruptive in positive and negative way, or
Yeah.
that's up to sort of debate. But it feels like now that it's been around here for almost 2.5 years.
Yeah.
It feels like it is disrupting the other way around, which is that it is taking people's jobs away,
Yeah.
in a sense that the traditional incumbents, they are, as usual, they're delaying the adoption. And then there's a new generation, the AI artists, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
They are coming up with their own models, and they are sort of being at the leading forefront. So, being your academic hat, do you think, what are the ethics of the AI using this model, and are the job disruption, as we discussed, is it actually happening now, or that's not the case?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I think first we have to define creativity, because in this context, what AI can do is combinational creativity, which actually comes out of a mathematician in Oxford who talks about it, where it's an endless loop of the data that you have, which keeps coming up with different options of creativity. That's what you call combinational creativity. The art that I think is art and elevates us forward is transformational creativity, which means you go beyond the set of existing data. You invent something anew. So that AI hasn't been able to do that yet. So I think, first of all, it's understanding the different types of creativity that we can observe. Now, again, a brand advertising wanting to commission an artist might just be very happy with combinational creativity. That's the
The
thing.
AI models are just going to do
It's
their
like
job.
it's
Yeah.
someone that just wants to put a poster on their wall might just be like, I'm very happy with combinational creativity. So I feel there's a market almost around decorative art for sure, where those artists are going to be massively challenged because that the AI can do that really easily. Transformational, which is what I'm discussing, which is coming new to a topic, coming new to a medium, innovating with it. The AI is not near it. Like, and that's also the part where I evolved for the past 10 years plus in terms of the company on artists. Again, every time they tackle a medium, they tackle it with a way that's so deeply innovative, whatever the medium is, even beyond technology in that front. So I think that's first is that division that I would say. I think the second thing is overall, the creativity has never been properly valued in society. Like it's been a long time that we don't value it. And
Can
you
you
know,
can you elaborate? What does that look like?
well, for instance, as a very basic personal anecdote, but then I will go on to like a more macro side. My dad refused for me to do literature and philosophy. So I had to, because I was very good at math, I had to turn up to every exercise and do the opposite answer, which actually was a really good intellectual exercise, to have such bad marks in math that I will have to be transferred to literature and philosophy, because that was where the people who were not good at maths, that's what they were doing. And that is still the case in France, where a smart student is one that does science and math. I was already completely convinced that it was not for me. Ironically, I was good at math, but it was just not what I wanted to pursue. I wanted to pursue the other side. That's already the statements of we don't. They're everywhere in our society. That this is intelligence, or what is most valued are the math, the economics, the science. Creativity tends to be something that's pretty on the side, and it's a nice little extra. In fact, even at a women level, history of art is advice that you just study it so that then you can get married to someone nice and then you can drop your career, right? So it is still something that is tangible. So I think for all those reasons, we have not been good at saying that's actually something that's incredibly valuable within our society. What's unfortunate is all the challenges that we have with mental health, with social cohesion, with lack of community, with lack of engagement with our environments can all be solved by creativity. We all know here that when we are being creative, we feel better. When we are, it's opening up our ways of thinking, it's enabling our empathy to kind of go deeper, it's enabling me to talk to people that I've never spoken to before, is making us better communities. And in fact, we live in London, which believes that culture is core. And we probably have chosen this city because amongst other cities, we have an insane exposure to creativity and culture. And that's something that we value on a daily basis. We think, how great, we have this diversity of thinking and diversity of creativity. So I think the case for creativity has to be made on a much stronger scale. As you know, I have my first academic paper was about the value of public art. I have been banging on the door for 10 years now on the economical, mental health value, community values, societal values of creativity and the creative sector. And I think that has been poorly articulated. It's also been a challenge that if you look at the art world, 95% of the art world comes from a privileged background. So it's again seen as a hobby of the wealthy. So it's about, on the one hand, valuing creativity at large, on the other end, making sure that this is no more a class division or access, but actually something that everyone gets exposed to and everyone has access to. So it kind of comes on the two folds. But with creativity being poorly valued, then someone is like, why don't I just get a poster made by a machine? Why do I need a creative for that? Now, when you understand the amounts of value that creatives add, even to a city, we've seen with Margate, we've seen with East London, they literally change a place and make it a better place at a place-making level, at a connection level. Having them integrated in the place that we live in is incredibly valuable. So once we start understanding this, then I think it makes sense to then make sure that we retain creatives within societies that we live in. Those are not good societies to live in, the ones where you don't have creatives in.
Rain, I'm going to ask you a very. I have this thought for a very long time. And going back to this sort of, you mentioned about geopolitics and the value of art. you don't think the last 100 years have been such that there's a thread of industrialization running through society, which is putting food on our tables?
Yeah,
Less children are dying today at birth, and all of those things, that
yeah,
industrialization, the oil economy, that from earth, that dig up that oil and make the machines run and do all of that. Has it not always been the case that the creativity, I'm using very broad terms, the art, the creativity is a thread around that industrialization, which perhaps will never be the main thread of life, but will always be there, adding, as you said, a mirror of critical thinking along that industrialization, that we will never have a society which might be purely creativity driven, because even industrialization with technologies, they might take a strand of creativity, but it's
yeah.
very much business and tech and all of that. But the ones that we sort of, let's say, talking about, where it's making an ordinary person think critically about something. And again, so that I want your thought on that, but I'm going to tie another question to that. But isn't always is the case that you mentioned that we're seeing a reverse of sort of progression happening? What would it take to become more mainstream again? Number two, because in my head, my personal head is thinking that it's a bit of a revolution, that someone needs to die, something really bad needs to happen,
Yeah,
and then
hopefully not. Yeah.
we wake up, oh my god, we have been asleep for a while. Tying those two questions up, what do you think?
So how can creativity be mainstream, you mean?
Yes, and what would it take?
So I think first of all, your answer on industrialization is for me based on the West, ultimately, where how countries exploited resources to basically power through their industrialization. I agree at large that poverty has been reduced, access to resources has been reduced, but we're still talking about a specific mindset that happened within the Western countries on what the industrialization looked like. If you widen the scope and look at West Africa or India or Bangladesh or other countries, craft and creativity is much better integrated, and so is collective thinking. So it's I think this is something I'm always so proud of, is our first project was actually outside of the West, and a lot of our artists are not West focused, because I think that conversation for me is looking at just the angle that we've experienced in the West, but actually loads of other cultures have not had that division. And also you see their collective spirits is much higher, their community spirits is much better, the way the crafting and the artistic expression is weaved is also much deeper. So I think we should actually learn plenty from other cultures and just look outside of the West. I think the West has shown that, of course, there's loads of progress that we've driven, but I think we're coming to its limits right now, whether it's sustainability, whether it's the friction socially, even our experience of democracy has to be partially rethought within the institutions that we've seen over the past few months. I feel like I am not really looking purely at the West for the answers anymore. So I would kind of encourage to look outside of it. I also feel that there was hope, I think, in the 19th century, because it's my favorite century when it comes to the arts and politics and philosophy, where suddenly you had those dinners with a philosopher, an industrialist, an artist, and everyone will kind of gather and there will be a real exchange of ideas. I think we have lost that exchange of ideas. As we know, we became too specialized. They always call the 20th century as this ultra specialization, where you're in your silo doing X and that is all you know.
Kind of like the Ford's factory. I think I feels like
Exactly.
that's where it started. Yeah.
Exactly, which, like you mentioned, can get things made more efficiently. Fantastic. But we've lost the exchange and interconnections of ideas. Creativity, and the reason, again, AI is still far from transformational creativity, it's about that transferability of ideas and skill sets and connecting the dots constantly. So you've talked to me about a complete different sector in a very different culture, and then I'm able to link that back to something that has nothing to do, but actually I'm going to connect the dots on this. That's by definition creativity. We have lost those conversations. If you look at a lot of the current geopolitical conversations happening, it's either I'm here or you're there. Even the identity conversation, you're X or I'm Y. Back to the reason why I absolutely love public art and the importance of that in cities is I have seen my projects, like we did the first gay and feminist festival in Saudi. You can imagine that was like 5 years ago. But actually, I've never had, in touch with, any backlash on the 300 projects that we did over the last 10 years. Because visually, I truly believe that you can come at it from thinking differently. You can think differently to me. You can be a very different identity, but you can still come to the visual projects without feeling like with words that we can't talk to each other. And I think that goes back to the importance of conversation. It always starts with a conversation. If you look at what worked in the 9th century and why artists were better integrated, is because they talked. They talked to the industrialists, they talked to the journalists, they talked to the philosopher. They were able to then merge this thinking and these ideas, which then rippled off onto society at large. We don't talk across sectors as much anymore. And in fact, we are too specialized, which I understand. Again, I run a team. I get the importance of people who are experts in what they do, but not having that crossovers, we are losing a lot of the creativity. So that's one thing I will say on, like, bringing it back mainstream. I think, again, it's, this is something so basic what I'm going to say, but as you know, in the book, I talk a lot about the fact that out of the 10,000 images that we see daily, which the majority are as you walk around our streets, the value systems that we are exposed to are consumption, wealth dynamics, specific beauty standards, individualistic pleasures. That's overall what we get to see, right? We know that we memorize 60% of what we see as opposed to 15% of what we hear. So that really shapes who and what we're going to elevate in society. But when you think about those value systems, we're missing health, we're missing education, we're missing civic spaces, we're missing art. I think also we have let our value system being defined outside of us to an extent that now we are much more consumers than we are citizens, and we have forgo a lot of the values that actually should be integral as part of our society. So I think that's an example here where a civic space like a city, you don't have to have 99% of it being commercialized with commercial visuals. You can have a say as someone who elects your politicians and saying, no, I just want only 20% of that being commercial. The rest, I want to have an educational narrative about the neighborhood, or I want a civic narrative. But we've forgotten our role in terms of civics, our civic role. And I think, again, like, art should be part of the civic, but so does healthcare and education should be part of it. For me, in the same way that I think it's madness that most artists are paid below the minimum wage in this country, is just as much madness that our healthcare staff and teachers are paid so poorly. Like, the three things makes absolutely no sense. It's like, how did we get to a system where we think that's normal, that we get pay a consultant at McKinsey, who I love, I've got loads of friends there, like 10 times the amount than someone who literally just saved lives. It just is bizarre. So we don't have to accept it. That is quite a recent conception. It's a 100-year-old conception. We can decide, actually, our value system needs to reshift. And within that shift, arts needs to have a more prominent place, in the same way that healthcare education has to have one too.
Marina, I'm imagining a scenario, let's say, more happened recently because we just had elections, but imagining myself speaking to whatever the next mayor of London who will be, or my local council. I'm in a crowd, and the candidate is in front of me, and they're taking these questions. What should we do? What would you want from us? I would feel that I would hear the question, we want more buses, we want this, very tangible things.
Yeah.
And I'm going to raise up, because I had a podcast with you 4 years ago, I'm going to raise up my hand. We need more spaces, as Maureen suggested, which are education-led, which are more civic and all of that. I would feel they laugh at me. The audience would laugh at me.
Well, I can help you argue it so that hopefully, first of all, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right that anyone should laugh at anyone. But I think, to give you a few more stats, 4 out of 5 billboards in the UK are in working class areas. So I live in a very privileged neighborhood in Marylebone. There's no billboard in Marylebone. You can imagine there will be a lobby within 2 seconds that would take down a potential billboard being put there, right? So we know what a nice quality of life looks like. Marylebone is filled with litter parks. lovely museum and architecture. So we have that answer. We know that's better for us. The mental health is better. The way to walk around the streets is much nicer. You're not pushed as much of the commercial thinking, and you feel more valued. So if we know, then I think that's criminal to think, well, actually, a specific class should have it substantially worse than us. So I think this is already something that we've acknowledged, because that's the reason, Time Out always publishes the best areas to live in London. And if you actually look at them, strangely enough, there's a lot less billboard, there's little coffee shops, there's little pedestrian streets. So we have the answers. We know what's best for us. But I think that we need policies and regulations that means that we're not going to just dump the worst on people who can't afford it. It's actually the same discussions around air pollution and most resources discussions, where I get to benefit from great air, but then I dump my air pollution on someone else. Whereas here, I get to have a lovely visual environment in the knowledge that the low income neighborhoods have it substantially worse. That is where you need policies. And I think in that conversation, because I bet you that the person that will be elected is likely to live in a lovely neighborhood. And I bet you he would not want to have loads of billboards around his house. I don't want to have that. But unfortunately, the ones who are most privileged are aware of their rights more. And most people don't understand that they have visual rights in the same way that they have a right to not have air pollution, which still kills a lot of people, as we know. 40,000 people still die from that on a yearly basis. So you have the right to say, I need a plan to change our air pollution. I need the cars to be like changing that. Like it's all of those things you have a say. But I think, again, because we haven't been taught about our civic rights, we're not exercising our critical thinking. We're not aware that we can just simply claim that rights. But in the case of low income neighborhoods in the UK, they have a right when the next billboard comes up, because there's a lot in planning, to say, no, I don't want it. This is a civic right to say no to that.
Marina, I absolutely love you for that. I mean, I would have never have thought of that. You just given me that thinking, then how advertising and socioeconomic backgrounds, how they're linked to each other.
Yes.
I live very close from where we are at the moment, and you're very right. There's very big parks, and there are no advertising there whatsoever. If you go to Richmond, which is the biggest park, zero billboards, nothing. But the moment let's say you go to far end of, I want to say, let's say Middlesex, on those, the streets are just filled with advertising because they're fueling that consumer culture.
And we're not even discussing what visually we're seeing on those billboards, which is usually fast food, gambling, fast fashion, which is even worse because we know they're experiencing consumer debt and we're pushing a further consumer debt on them. So like I mentioned, I think it's criminal. It's in the same way that there's a great study that came out with the US on how race, and depending on your race, you have more air pollution. We know there's discrimination in all of this access to resources. So I don't think they should laugh at you, but I think you should come with all those facts, which are very difficult to then challenge back. But I think that it's about an equity, a visual equity, in the same way that people don't think the arts is for them. Is understanding that they have a say in their visual environment.
Thank you so much for that. Now the elections are going to happen. I know what exactly to ask and what arguments to present. Taking a bit of a zoomed out perspective, you mentioned that your work is expanding globally and you're working with a lot of sort of cross-culture sort of artists. I want to ask you the question that the emotions that humans have, they are rough. They are the same everywhere. The love, the hate, the experiences that we have, they're across the culture. They're independent of where you are from. What makes an artist a Western artist then, and what makes them an Eastern artist?
That's interesting. Well, in a way, I think art is an expression. So by definition, it's an expression of also a background, a cultural exposure, a set of values that you would have kind of seen and been exposed to. I think then you can decide to emulate them or reject them. So you have different types of artists. Like I mentioned, Cuba, a lot of these artists, which unfortunately, as you know, for the past few years are now being banned from the government, are responding against the government. But you're still born with a set of exposure. And then I think a lot of artists are going to take that with them. So I don't think there's a difference in terms of, someone, and we've seen that actually throughout history, like, you've seen that certain types of innovation around the way paint was used, or even around gods and goddesses were similar in Nigeria than it was in ancient Greece. Like, so I feel when it comes to innovation, you see similar patterns across the globe, and no country holds innovation above another. But what they will come with is their understanding of the culture and the exposure and the set of values that they would have been exposed to. And I think because I love diversity of thinking and diversity of expression, that's what I look for in artists. It's also like, it's a luxury of my job. And the reason why, again, I think art is essential is the luxury to be exposed to people will make you see something differently. It's even being now in a couple where we come from two different countries, my kids have three different nationalities. I pick the parts that I like in each culture. I see even in education, the bits I'm like, I don't like that in that culture. I'm going to take this. Like, it's such a nice feeling to think that you're constantly exposed to the same issue, but looked at it very differently. And I think again, that's what an artist will be able to bring from a different cultural background.
So it is a bit of a Lego work that you might be.
Constant, and hopefully having less and less biases, having less and less prejudice, having less and less assumption. I think this is ironic within the context of the homogenous culture that we discussed, but one of the biggest luxury again that I love in my job is that it's very hard to come to a country with assumption. I tend to actually be challenged on my assumption with my job because I meet local artists who would basically make me see something very differently. And often the media would have portrayed a country in the opposite way to what I would have ultimately seen by the locals. And as we know, there's so much difference between the government and its local people per se. So it's also in a time where everything is trying to kind of put people in boxes. It's a really lovely intellectual exercise to be exposed to arts constantly, to actually challenge every bias that you could have about a different type of person, a different type of cultural background, or different types of country, especially because the media that we consume are still owned by a type of people that is quite similar from a specific part of the world. So it's important to do that through arts as well.
That's amazing. Maureen, there's a popular saying, and people don't know who actually it was. I think they sometimes quoted from Mr. Churchill that we design things and they end up designing us back.
Yeah, visuals do that.
How have you been changed by the things you have designed, albeit the company that you have designed, or the things
That's a very good question. As an entrepreneur, I think my company has reshaped, redesigned me, remolded me on a daily basis. I think in a weird way, whether this is kids or company, they reshape you daily. There's not a day that you're not being reshaped by them, because one, you're really trying to do the right thing. You're really trying your very best. The timings keep changing. Your understanding of the business world, the geopolitical world keeps evolving. But yeah, my company has completely remodeled me and continues to remodel me. I have long let go of any form of ego and pride. I don't even know what that is. Because you're constantly trying to think, how can I come at this company and add the best value? How can I ultimately get it to the next stage? How and it's a very fluid exercise, especially for the past 5 years, because as any CEOs, we've had COVID, recessions, inflations, political crisis. So like, you're coming afresh on a daily basis, trying to work out how can I make sure this company gets there. But it's a lovely exercise. I actually love the flexibility. Again, back to my kind of obsession with dancing ballet, but there's a nice feeling of being flexible. It's a nice feeling that you can adapt, you can be flexible. And through flexibility, that's a transferable skill set to all aspects of your life that, again, you can apply to adapt to different situations, adapt to meeting people who think differently than you. So it's a good thing. But as you would know, as an entrepreneur, like, it's a brutal reshift of yourself on a constant basis. You cannot come at it with any form of rigidity, because the company, the teams, the HR, the larger economical context will constantly ask you for change. And if you're not prepared for that, I think there's not much you will be able to do. I actually think the parallel with the kids is the same. You cannot come at it thinking, I want my kid to be X. Your kid will be the person they want to be. And around that, you're going to have to constantly evolve on how you support them emotionally, how you support them psychologically, how you support them to be the person that they want to be. and you will not get it right on a daily basis. So you have to keep adjusting. It's the Lego blocks again. To enable them to become the individual that they want to become. And the company is the same, because the company has to become its own ideas that is beyond you and that strive beyond you. So it's the same way, like you want to keep tweaking until actually that company is bigger and bigger and better. But it's I like it. I enjoy it, as you can see. But yeah, there's no rigidity left. It's a full flexibility.
I love that. Right, putting on your CEO hat for another second. I want to ask you, because your work is so diverse now in terms of geographies that you work with. Coming back to the UK conversation, do
Yeah.
you? And this is something which has popped up a lot in conversations, that for you, for your work, does it still serves to be the best kind of foundational spot to
Yeah.
then go emanate all over the world and do your work? Or do you feel like it's becoming every day a bit more challenging to have a foundation in London and UK?
Yeah. Well, so I think, first of all, I'm going to declare my biases, because for me, the UK, I mean, it's ironic now, but I entered the UK when Boris Johnson was mayor of London, and saying that he wanted the top European brains to join his city. So now it's funny to think about that. He's obviously changed his mind since. But the UK gave me everything. It gave me a business. It gave me a book with the top publisher that I wanted, Penguin. It gave me a whole network and basically a life. So I'm incredibly attached to the country. I'm like the example of the expat who feel incredibly grateful. So I just became an British citizen. So this is why I want to like clarify full biases, that I am clearly very attached to the place I'm in, because there's for any expats there will be a place that gives you everything, and for me that has been the UK. The UK has set up my life basically, and I'm forever grateful to that. I would say I'm also very attached culturally to what the UK stands for, and I think that is a blend of the UK and London. I think probably because having been a Londoner now my whole life, like since I came here, I think it's also a lot of it are Londoners' values. But the fact that every day I meet someone from a different nationalities or cultural backgrounds without even trying, for instance, is something that if I was in Paris, which is France where I come from, I would not have. I wouldn't have that diversity of cultural backgrounds and
Really,
ideas.
Paris is a very big. Would you not say
It's
it's
a big city,
multicultural?
but it's a much more French heavy way of thinking, a way of doing things. What I've always loved about London is that everyone is adding his little blocks. So the city is almost set up that way. Even the architecture, you would have a Georgian building next to a Brutalist building. It's almost a diversity constantly of different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking, different ways to come at it culturally. I'm addicted to that. And I now can't imagine live in a place that is not like this, because I fuel myself in trying different bits from different cultures, in again, like picking up a book from someone very different. And if I look at my friendships and the way that surrounds, again, my family life as well, everyone is from so many different places, and I think that's so incredible and such a rich quality of life. And I hope we protect that at the UK level. In terms of the current economical sector, I think in between, we haven't seen any deeper in revenues. So we continue to grow as a company. Realistically, we are a team of international and British people, which means that we're quite expats, most of us. So we use, and we have always used, a UK almost as a harbor where we can then take off to a destination from. And the UK has that because the UK's idea of doing business and trade and diplomacy has always been, because it was such a limited resource, to ultimately being constantly working with the other countries. I'm not validating colonization, I'm validating trade. Like it's very, very clear on that I'm not validating the British Empire, but I'm more validating the act of understanding the need to constantly trade and exchange with different countries and to build that. And I feel the UK still has that card to play. So in our case, we haven't seen a drop of revenues. I'm still very attached for what London stands for. Realistically, at a government level, I feel right now, given the madness of the current geopolitics, I'm very happy with our government. I know there's obviously been a lot of backlashes at the entrepreneurial level. I would like to flag that quite a lot of the criticism around the high net worth living, ironically, was a law that was voted by the previous government and not this current one. But also, they have again put equity, education, arts, entrepreneurs back into the forefront of the conversation. Let's see what can happen, because I think with politics, as we know, they need time. Um, but when I hear a lot of what the other government talks about, which are extreme ways of thinking, immigration, all of those things, I think, frankly, we have something mild and moderated that seems to be at the head of our country right now.
The
So
cases
I
abroad are quite extreme, I guess. Yeah.
I feel pretty happy with. I think any moderation right now is a pretty good pick, frankly, and what I'm quite lucky to be in. So I'm not. I hear obviously the worries, but I think those are also at large global worries. You know, my sector is the lowest it's ever been done for the past 30 years. You know, that's not a UK problem. That's a global problem. It's anyway. We are coming to the end of a way of doing things that is fully shifting in most sectors. And I think that's, for me, that's why I wouldn't say it's a UK problem. I would say it's a global problem. I am sure this is, I mean, CEOs, funders, companies, employees struggle to kind of get jobs. It's a stressful times at large, but I wouldn't make it a British problem. I'll make it a global problem.
And I think it has been throughout history. There's never been like a decade where the whole thing was just always just going up. And I think things do go in cycles. And I think
Exactly.
sometimes you find yourself in the middle of it. But then when you zoom out a little bit and you realize, okay, I'm not the one who's suffering alone like this. Or, it's as you said, it's a global phenomena. Um, Tell me more about book.
I am very happy about the book, but also because I had to spend 10 years talking about financials, which is what a CEO has to do. And my God, it was so liberating to just be able to talk about all the intellectual values of what we set up the business. That was just like a whole new world that opened up to me last year when we published the book. And I think we've had something like 70 events. Yeah, it's been incredible in terms of sales, engagement, community, audiences, the joy of really like pushing ideas that I really care about. So I'm over the moon. The book's ultimately thesis is the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, you're consuming 10,000 images a day, which is a huge amount of images, which actually is quite conservative because it's only about to increase. You live in a very visual world, and most people dismiss it. Back to kind of the hierarchy that we discussed of topics, people think visuals are superficial and cute and don't do much. But actually, when you look at the neuroscience level, they fully shape
Yeah, yeah.
how we want to be, our belief system, our notion of genders, because it seems to be the current conversation for the past few weeks and months. But even our idea of who we are identity wise is shaped by what we see daily. So the idea is to make you aware of that, the amount of visuals that you consume daily, who makes them, who produces them, the impact that they have on you, where they're displayed, because the conversation has always been on social media, but I don't think that's actually the main part of the conversation. Like I mentioned, a lot of them are already in our civic spaces. It's not just solely to do with social media. The second part is visual literacy. So visual literacy, the good news is that 65% of us are visual learners. So actually, we all normally have a pretty good capacity to become a visually literate person, but we never get to visual literacy. Visual literacy is, especially with the rise of visual misinformation or AI imagery, is understanding, for instance, let's go back to our dear Trump. He reposted a AI video that was a satire from a studio in California. I don't know if you remember the Gaza video he posted a couple of months ago, but
I
that
remember.
Gaza
Yeah.
video initially was produced as a satire by a studio that was experimenting with AI video. Now he reposted it as something that was truthful. That's really interesting because that's the thesis of visual misinformation. So why visual critical thinking will be here very important is because you first of all have like tools like reverse image searches tools like TNI, who helps you to understand where was the image or the visual video first posted. Pretty important because in this case, you will see that was initially a satire, which is a completely different messaging than the one he's posting out. In the case of a lot of our geopolitical conflicts, some images that are used for current conflicts are actually 10 or 15 years old. So, kind of understanding the source is very important. Obviously, not all of us can check every image source every time we get exposed to an image, but then you can choose which media do that research. So, like BBC, for instance, has BBC Verify, which is a department that a division was in the BBC that verifies the content and the media that they actually use. So then you can basically decide, I will go for media, will have that application of checking the source, which is really important. The second thing is also, again, and the awareness at large on what is being pushed to us visually. And I go back to the value systems I mentioned. As I commuted to here, I'm mostly pushed to consume. That's fine, but this is 5% of what my life should be, especially when we know that the more exposed you are to commercial imagery, the lower your well-being, because of course you're like constantly fed those new desires, so it's too
Kind
much
of
for your
induces
brain.
anxiety and all those other
Exactly, it's
things.
very
Yeah.
anxiety driven. And then Warwick University did loads of research on the topic, and it's obviously very anxiety driven too. So I think it's understanding what am I visually inputting into me on a constant basis. I think at a gender level, for instance, it's insane the amount of insecurities that have been created in the last 10 years. It's like you've had desires created, but also insecurities created, things that you would never have worried about. And unfortunately for you, that now the male beauty space is exploding, so I think it's
Damn
coming
it.
to you now. um, there's actually a really interesting stat, that 2 years ago only 15% of CEO of the FTSE 100 were on social media and LinkedIn. Is now 85%. And I'm sure you've noticed a lot of the CEOs while sweating telling you about the market. But actually, visual appearances in leadership and visual literacy is even more relevant than it used to be. So, and unfortunately for you, all the pressures we used to have are also coming to you guys.
I
So
feel
you
like
maybe can start having empathy on what we've gone through before. But
I'm
I
gonna
feel
check out
that
my
is
wardrobe straight away. See what I'm gonna.
exactly. You will now start seeing all this, like, which I'm sure are very difficult to do. The sweaty running videos, they're talking about market numbers, which I'm actually very full of respect in how they've been able to combine the two. But that's visual literacy. Is it's a comprehension of what you see visually. It's so that you can hopefully put distance between the consumption of that visual and the action you're going to make from it. Like the idea is you can't just walk around, the city blocking your eyes, but hopefully you can take a step back thinking, hold on, if I'm insecure about that, or if I don't feel great about that, or if I want to consume that, do I really want to? Or is that because it's a tense image that I see that's pushing this? That's critical thinking. In the same way that at large critical thinking enables you to make better decision. So that's visual literacy. The third part is the part that you ask about the politician, which is how do you become more active as as a citizen in your visual environment. All of the options I put forward are free, so there's nothing that implies cost. Obviously, this is where sadly we don't have the same privileges, where some people have less time than other to ultimately exercise some of those rights, which I fully get, and will not judge on. But this is an idea that now that you actually literate, you need to be active, because you can't passively accept that most of the visual environment you are in is being designed for you. You're having to be much more active for it.
What chapter would you recommend me? I'm really sorry I haven't read the book, but I
It's
would love
okay.
to read it. It's something that I always thought about, but never realized that it can be put together. I just put my ignorancy out there. I never thought that I should go ahead and read a book about it, but I feel like I should start with yours. But what chapter would you recommend me to straight away to read?
I feel, I think it's very hard to ask a writer which chapter, because obviously I care deeply about every sentence I put forward.
For me specifically.
I think you seem to be very much on what action can I make. So I feel go straight to the civic side, like be active in that front, like I think, but I fully understand that also going back to not valuing creativity. This doesn't feel like a topic you should discuss, but what's really interesting is that it's like the fish in the water. We are surrounded by visuals, and we have never been in a more visually led society. So it's that kind of fish and water situation where we are not actually valuing something that is omnipresent in our life, which feels a bit scary to me. But I've heard that. I think the first thing of the book is everyone is always like, I've never thought about it, but now I can't stop thinking about it. So I think I know that this is obviously the reaction that people have towards the topic.
Amazing. Um, Continuing on that question, what I have been ignorant of, the question that I've never asked you before or even today. What is that thing that you think that I should have asked you?
That's a very hard question. What do I think? I have no idea.
So I've done my job then.
You'd be perfect. I have no idea. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to say.
Rain, we have this tradition at the podcast. What we do is, so obviously you've written a really amazing book. I'm gonna buy it for myself. I'm gonna read it myself. But any sort of author, any book that has a profound effect on you, going back to the design thing, something that has designed you back.
So I so I'm going to say one that is controversial is Atlas Shrugged, because unfortunately Atlas Shrugged was taken on by Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and most of California. But actually, what's really interesting is Atlas Shrugged is 1,200 pages and is now emulated by the technocrats in almost a destruction of our current democracy and in elevating the individualistic rights. What's interesting with Atlas Shrugged is the main character is a woman, which is never discussed by Peter Thiel and the rest. And she's very morally ambitious. She wants a whole new set of social values to be implemented into society. So the author came from Russia, which is obviously the communist regime, and then say in the US. The part that we always hear about is the capitalistic emulation. But the reason it's quite a complex book is because it's actually the integration of both. And that had a profound impact on me for many reasons. I kind of understood the concept of moral ambition from that book, which is an ambition that is not, again, your classic dollar signs and fast cars and kind of glass building, but one that is substantially making an impact within the society that you're in and to change a set of existing values. And that book has that. She is also completely against the idea of entitlement and inheritance, ironically, within who emulates her now. And also talks a lot about the fact that she wants equity within the society. So I kind of want to reinstill that because unfortunately people get a bit lazy and they go to Fontaine's Head, which is substantially shorter as a book. And then they think they know Atlas Shrugged because unfortunately the author has had pretty controversial talks after she published the book. But I think this is a pretty complex book that cannot be summarized by just Peter Thiel interpretation. And I refuse it is summarized by him because I don't agree with that summary. So I think that's one I would relook at, especially for the current timings, because what Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are trying to emulate is actually this kind of destruction of democracy that then leads to the technocrats leading, which is exactly the ending of the book. So it's also interesting to kind of look at it because they've spoken so much about it.
Yeah.
I will put it on this. I will put Orwell and Huxley in the same brackets right now because I think so much of, which is interesting because all of those books were written after World War II, around times of war. So there's really, I think there's so much we can learn from those books in the current geopolitics, and I've enjoyed going back to them and picking up on that. On a lighter note, books that I've also really loved is Body Keeps the Score. For anyone who, after the conversations we've all had, who tends to be much in his own brain and overtly intellectual and overtly dictatorial with their brain, Body Keeps the Score is led by a neuroscientist who talks about the importance of body and brain working together, which was something I needed to hear a few years back. And I think this has hopefully made my leadership better. And this hopefully made me a much more integrated person than just this brain dictating what the body should be doing. And there's also really interesting research around what we understand of the body at this stage and the different interactions. So I love that. I think something that, because you asked about what we can change visually as well, is probably the power of habits. I also really like because it shows that one habit can change an entire society.
Yes.
And it usually starts with a tiny little habits and it's divided upon three parts. So the first part is habits that are individual, second, business habits, third, societal habits. And there's a lovely example of Rosa Parks deciding not to sit on the bus with the blacks, but sit with the whites too, and refusing to obey. And he looks at how a simple habit can then disrupt a whole system.
Yeah.
And I love that because I think right now we are probably feeling overwhelmed with the amount of changes we want to see. But that's a reminder, just like the book I've written, that it's not about the big change. It's about that tiny refusal or that tiny habit that you just say, no, I won't do that, or I will change that. And that ripple effect that this habit has, which also I feel is much more achievable at a human level for all of us and less overwhelming. So that's a really nice little hopeful book because it's things that we can all implement. And it kind of shows at large on how this has actually generally impacted our society socially, and how this is possible. Even if it feels so mundane at first, it can trigger as like a whole ripple effect.
Amazing. I mean, I think I failed to mention the second part of that question. We we weren't gonna give that book to one book to one person
Oh,
and
I
help
see.
that connect. But the moment you were listing them out, and my head was like budget, budget, budget. So all those books we have to give them out. Previously, someone mentioned that they'd like, I think it was a magazine series or something.
Well, then keep Atlas Shrugged, because I think it needs to be rehabilitated.
Okay, perfect. So
But
that
someone has
saves
to
us.
comment. I don't want anyone pretending they've read it, because
Yes,
a number of dinners I go to where people pretend they've read it, and then I'm like, you haven't read it. It needs to be that someone has read it fully, because that's the point. It's a very complex book if you read it fully, but you cannot just assume that you know what it is.
amazing. Well, we'll give that book away, and yeah, people can sort of. What's the best way to connect with you for people who, if they want to?
I mean, as you know, I'm pretty easy to reach in a sense that, like, I love conversations with people. Um, so LinkedIn, Instagram, obviously for the business, there's several email addresses on the site depending on which side you're interested in, whether it's collecting art or working with artists or the projects of being an artist. Yeah, I think for me, as you've hopefully seen through the podcast, I'm very ideas led. So I think I always like people who come at me, making me think differently or adding to an ongoing conversation that we're thinking at. So always feel free to kind of reach out on that basis. And kind of push new angles on something that we care about that we haven't thought of.
Amazing. Marine, thank you so much for being on the pod. I'm going to walk away from this one today, actually, uh, being one bit better of a civic human being in London. And I know what I'm going to be doing in 4 years from now when the elections are
Exactly.
going to be
Just
happening.
like push it.
So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
We do a customary handshake. So thanks so much.
Well, total pleasure.